When discussing the Jedi Order around the period of the Phantom Menace and the Clone Wars, there's a word that often gets used to describe them: dogmatic. This term is cited as the biggest reason for their downfall, the very nail driven into their coffin that ended the reign of the Galactic Peacekeepers after 1,000 generations. But what does that really mean? It's very easy to call them dangerously dogmatic, but how exactly did that manifest? And what happened to cause the Jedi Council to rely on their own thinking instead of the will of the Force? Greetings again, acolytes and lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. In today's holocron, we wanted to return and outline some important parts of the lore. Oftentimes, it's difficult to understand exactly why the Jedi High Council has become so problematic in their final days. Their rigidity is talked about at length, especially among our own holocrons, but we really felt that it was important to retread both the Council's moral failings and the reasons behind them. And this brings us to asking you for something very important. If there are other parts of the lore or confusions that you want to have cleared up in detail, please be sure to comment them down below and we will address them. The archives are ever at your service, and we always want to make sure that you guys are never lost when it comes to the important lore information. Now, without further ado, why did the Council lose sight of the Force itself? It's important to establish the original design of the Jedi Order in order to provide a contrast when viewing them from the Clone Wars era. When the Order first allied themselves with the Republic, circa 24,953 BBY, it was a friendship born out of necessity. The Order had first moved to the mid-rim world of Ossus after being forced to leave their homeworld of Tython in the Deep Core. Originally, they were simple mystics that kept to themselves, until they realized that the Republic had the potential to become something truly special. Democracy that could unite the stars in peace and progression. At the time they joined, the Tianese War was about to break out. The Tianese War was a conflict that would see the Empire of the Tion Cluster attack the Republic. At the time, the Jedi happened to be positioned right between these two entities, serving as the first line of defense for a very young Republic. Their bravery during this war and their ability to mitigate a crisis through their wisdom in the Force is what cemented them as guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy. From that point forward, almost everyone in the Republic deferred to the wisdom of the Jedi High Council, who had a direct line, of course, to the Supreme Chancellor, the heart of the Senate, and the Republic. Back in this day, the Jedi drew a very clear line in the sand as to what their role was. They refused to consider themselves as agents of the Republic, and made it transparent that they were not its soldiers. Their desire was to use their power and connection to the Force to guide this young government into prosperity. Their insight was especially prized, though, due to its impartiality. The Jedi were mystics and seers who sought the will of the Force first and foremost, and would act according to what they received from it. Their ability to see into the future and discern truth from lies allowed them to mediate between powerful opponents, and much of the Republic's expansion is owed to the negotiations of the Jedi Knights. But if there were a problem to arise, the Jedi would take up arms in service to the peace. However, they did only as much was necessary. There was a time or two when the Jedi either pulled out of a certain conflict or refused to participate altogether. These decisions were usually made if the Council disagreed with the Senate's actions. The Jedi would abstain from helping as a form of protest against the Republic. And so the original design of the Order's relationship to the Republic was this. They were guardians of Republic space and expressly peacekeepers. Peace itself was paramount to uphold, but they had wisdom in knowing which of their actions would further compromise that peace. They weren't afraid back then to make a moral stand against the Republic Senate, and they gave the truth as unfiltered as the Force gave it to them. While it was the will of the Force for the Jedi to act as guardians and guides to the Republic, they were careful not to become soldiers or extensions of the Republic's military. But because of their status, they were granted special judicial powers and were allowed to act as lawful marshals anywhere in the Republic. But now we filtered that through tens of thousands of years full of war and moments when the only thing that stood between the Republic and total extermination was the lightsaber of the Jedi. The Jedi Knights compromised their independence more and more as the generations wore on. The enemies that attacked the Republic went from political enemies to the Sith. And because the Sith were an offshoot of the Jedi Order, they saw the Jedi and the Republic as intrinsically tied entities. So when the Sith attacked the Jedi, they were really attacking the Republic, and vice versa. And so in order to protect their beloved government, the Jedi allowed themselves to slip into being intrinsically tied to the Republic. Soon it appeared as though neither could exist without the other. The Republic became entirely reliant on the Jedi to bail them out of every problem, and the Jedi began to view the very foundation of their beliefs as being tied to the Republic's safety. This in and of itself wouldn't have necessarily been an issue, so long as the Jedi continued to allow the Force to dictate their actions and how they should keep that peace. But bringing the Republic back from the brink of extinction over and over again gave the Jedi an ego. And the conclusion of the light and the darkness war set in motion a chain of events that would cause the Jedi to rely more on their written doctrine than the Force itself. The light and darkness war was the final conflict with the Sith that ended in 1000 BBY. Lord Khan's Brotherhood of Darkness made a final stand against the Jedi Order in a long and a grueling conflict. This left both sides exhausted and radicalized. This wasn't until a Sith Lord by the name of Bane, who would see that this was a losing fight, crafted an idea that would save the Sith. In order for the Sith to eventually triumph, they would have to totally remake themselves. Bane would undermine Lord Khan, resulting in the total destruction of the Brotherhood of Darkness in one fell swoop. Darth Bane was the last Sith left alive, as was his intention, and he then began the Rule of Two. The Rule of Two was a new philosophy for the Sith that would ensure that their survival in the shadows would be maintained until the time was perfect. But this final victory made the Jedi believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that their ancient enemies had finally been defeated. For thousands of years, the Sith rose up and attacked the Republic, almost bringing it to its knees again and again. But finally, at long last, they had been wiped out. The Jedi had no knowledge of the Rule of Two, and so celebrated the extinction of their ancient enemy. A time of peace would ensue for the next millennium, and this is where everything goes downhill for the Jedi High Council. Peace destroys them. Having now defeated the Sith for what they thought was once and for all, the Jedi saw themselves as invincible. Watching over the Republic from their ivory towers on Coruscant, their wisdom seemed infallible. Ironically, the Jedi had been operating in wartime so long that they forgot how to live in the peaceful state that they had been trying so hard to achieve. And so they neglected to seek the Force for wisdom, and decided that their teachings, their codes, and their doctrines were what would keep them in line. Not only this, but so many Sith Lords had risen from the Jedi's own ranks, and so they cracked down hard following the rule to the letter. They suppressed both emotions and lines of thinking that were too out of the ordinary. Soon enough, their triumphant joy became arrogance, and the insight that had once served to make them perfect judges was taken from them. They were blinded to what was truly happening in the galaxy, all while believing themselves to be the supreme authority on all matters relating to the Force. But it went further. In an effort to make things peaceful, the Jedi slipped into being submissive to the Senate. Unlike before when they made hard moral stances against wrongdoing, they now obeyed every dictate that the Senate gave them, even if that meant turning a blind eye to injustice. They allowed slavery to persist in the Outer Rim because trifling with the Hutts was too difficult. They neglected to stand up for worlds that were being preyed on by greedy corporations, all because those companies had lined the pockets of the corrupt senators that kept bills from being passed. Even worlds directly under attack were not given aid unless the corrupt and squabbling Senate could agree to dispatch the Jedi there. Their once great-reaching arm of justice was blunted by the discord of the Senate that could never agree on anything, and the Jedi allowed it to happen in order to maintain their public appearance of purity and authority. And now we reach the point of the Republic Classic era, the time of the Phantom Menace. Starting out, Qui-Gon informed them of the mysterious warrior he encountered on Tatooine, an assassin well-trained in the Jedi arts, a man he believed to be a Sith. The Council met his claim with immediate skepticism. Rather than searching the Force on this matter, Ki-Adi-Mundi piped up without hesitation. Impossible, he said. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium. Windu concurred with Ki-Adi's assessment, stating that they couldn't have returned without the Council knowing. Despite the fact that Qui-Gon had seen and fought this being for himself, he was giving them irrefutable proof. They dogmatically relied on their own knowledge, not even considering for a moment that they might have overlooked something. The Council's critical thinking and assumptions began to overshadow openness to the Force's warnings. And then immediately after, Qui-Gon presents them with the possibility that he had found the Chosen One of ancient prophecy. The two events correlate perfectly: the return of the Sith to off-balance the Force, and the rise of the Chosen One to restore it. Yet the Council would not give credence to the prophecy or put two and two together. Master Jin was flabbergasted that they denied his training, and pleaded with them that they must see that he is in fact the Chosen One. And even if the boy wasn't, he still had incredibly high potential and an unprecedented midichlorian count, rivaling even Yoda's. And yet the Council rigidly stuck to their doctrine, stating that the boy was too old to train. They sensed great fear in him and decided that it was not in their best interest to take him in. The Jedi did not consider the idea that allowing a boy with that much power and fear to be loose in the galaxy could be disastrous. Rather, they enforced the Jedi Code despite the clearly extraordinary circumstances. Dave Filoni later expounded upon this moment and Qui-Gon's relationship with the Jedi Council when he said this: "The Jedi had lost their way, and Qui-Gon was one of the few true Jedi left. He stood for what they once were. This was perhaps one of the reasons why the Jedi Council disliked Qui-Gon so much. He represented what they used to be, a Jedi willing to listen and act upon the will of the Force no matter how unpopular it was, and that did not fit their inflexible ideologies. Besides this, the Jedi refused to get fully involved with the happenings on Naboo. Because the Senate could not decide to help Queen Amidala fight against the Trade Federation, the hands of the Jedi were tied. However, the Council did one good thing by exploiting a loophole. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were tasked with the Queen's safety. And so because they were still technically recognized as her security, they had to go wherever she went. This allowed the Jedi to be on Naboo and aid the liberation from the Trade Federation. However, the Council's oversight pertaining to the Sith and their unwillingness to go all in for Naboo could likely be blamed for Qui-Gon's death at the hands of Darth Maul. This was, at least, exactly how Dooku saw things, prompting him to permanently leave the Jedi Order. But their strict mindset and ties to politics would soon cause them to make many more misjudgments. During Attack of the Clones, an attempt was made on the life of Padme. Behind the scenes, it was a revenge ploy by Newt Gunray of the Trade Federation and Darth Sidious, who needed her out of the way so that she could not vote against the Military Creation Act. After meeting with the Jedi, she accurately offered that perhaps Dooku was behind the attack. After all, he had become a staunch critic of the Republic and the leader of the new separatist movement. However, once again, Ki-Adi-Mundi dismissively replied that Dooku was a political idealist, not a murderer. Windu again supported this by reminding her that Dooku was once a Jedi. They were not able to accept the possibility that one of their own could have fallen to such depths. This overrode their intuition on the situation. Their dogmatic trust in their own order's infallibility kept them from recognizing the darkness in Dooku. Not too long afterwards, Master Yoda admitted the Jedi's insight was being obstructed when he said this: "The dark side clouds everything." Yet, rather than urgently seeking the will of the Force to discern this threat, the Council remained complacent and skeptical. As the Separatist crisis escalated, the Jedi Council became increasingly entangled with the Senate's political needs. Mace Windu would be the one to remind the Chancellor that they were keepers of the peace, not soldiers. But that statement proved to be deeply ironic once the Clone Wars kicked off. When Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered a secret clone army on Kamino, it alarmed the High Council. They hadn't foreseen this at all, proving that their connection to the Force had been diminished. They were blind, and they had finally been shown the irrefutable truth of that. When communing with Yoda, Windu suggested that they inform the Council that their ability to touch the Force had been weakened. However, Yoda spoke against this. He stated that only the Dark Lord of the Sith knows their weakness. If they were to inform the Senate that they were vulnerable, their problems would compound and their enemies would multiply. And so the Council's response to their blindness was not to seek the Force for reconnection, but to suppress the truth politically. And so, fearful of losing public confidence, the Jedi started prioritizing their public image and strategy over seeking deeper enlightenment with the Force. Another moment when they suppressed the truth occurred in 19 BBY, when Plo Koon uncovered the lightsaber of the Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas on Obadiah. This prompted an investigation that confirmed the Sith's role in creating the clone army. Discovering their sworn enemies gave them the army they fought beside obviously should have been a startling and a game-changing revelation. But the Council's response was to conceal it. Windu warned that public knowledge of the Sith involvement would undermine faith in the Jedi, and the Republic war effort in turn. It could even shatter their alliance with the clones. And so Yoda ruled that the knowledge must be kept under wraps instead of further investigation. Throughout the Clone Wars, the Council's strict adherence to their war duties often blinded them to repeated Sith machinations. The Council came to see the war as just a fight to be won, the same as the previous wars had been, rather than questioning whether their role as generals was the will of the Force this time. And over the years, they continued to make more and more compromising decisions. They took the bombing of the Jedi Temple at face value, and accused Ahsoka Tano of betrayal rather than searching their feelings on the matter first. Their apology when the truth came out was too little too late. In the canon Dark Disciple novel, the Council allows themselves to sink into a new level of depravity. sanctioning the assassination of Count Dooku. Wanting to end the war by any means necessary, they resort to a despicable plan that went against everything their code stood for. Obi-Wan was deeply disturbed by this decision, and only spoke out against it when everything went to crap because of it. It resulted in not only Dooku escaping, but also Quinlan Vos temporarily falling to the dark side. Yoda would later come face to face with the Council's dogma when the ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn directly reached out to him. He confided in his fellow Council members that he was hearing the voices of the dead. Instead of considering that the Force could be releasing new secrets, their minds were too occupied on the suspicion of war. They thought that it was a Sith trick, and questioned whether or not Yoda was under the influence of the Sith. They went so far as to place their own Grand Master under armed guard when he was in the hospital wing, forcing Yoda to use Anakin's penchant for rule breaking to help him escape. And finally, in Revenge of the Sith, the Council's dogmatism and their entanglement in politics reaches a dangerous climax. Their distrust of Palpatine led them to scheme in ways that played right into his hands. Palpatine's continued accumulation of power in the Senate made them so afraid that they considered making a full Jedi coup, which was what Sidious wanted to accuse them of. Mace, after stating that he sensed a plot to destroy the Jedi, said that the dark side of the Force surrounded the Chancellor. Master Mundi says that if Palpatine did not relinquish his emergency powers after Grievous's arrest, then he should be removed from office. Windu then responded by saying that the Jedi would have to take control of the Senate. Yoda puts a stop to this treacherous discussion by telling everyone that this line of thinking would take them to a dark place. But by now, it was far too late. They were already there. In the most ironic twist of all, the Council's own dogma to their code had led them to compromising all of the morals that they claimed to abide by. This even extended to Windu deciding to execute Palpatine instead of letting him stand trial. And so, my friends, this was how the Jedi High Council lost their way, how their dogma became their defining trait, and how their critical thinking led to them acting in contrast to the will of the Force. So was this something that you had been wondering? If this gave you a deeper insight into the lore of the Jedi, then leave a like and tell us what other things you would like us to explain in further detail. As said in the beginning, the archives are forever at your service. Until next time, thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel, and may the Force be with you.